Hey everybody, it's Ron from Pick Dawgz, and welcome back to the NFL edition of Ron's Rundown. We're going to go over the Sunday and Monday games in the NFL for Week 3. If you like what you see, make sure to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe and put your football picks in the comments section below. And if you're looking for my best bets, you can find those at the Premium Picks tab at pickdawgz.com. There's also a link in the description. Alrighty, let's get into it. Here are the games for Week 3 in the NFL. First up, the New York Giants taking on the Cleveland Browns. The Browns are right now a 6.5-point favorite. Total is at 39.5 points. Now, the Browns bounced back last week with a win over the Jaguars, 18-13. Cleveland was a 2.5-point dog in that one, so a small upset win for the Browns. They definitely made improvements offensively, but still, we haven't seen them get over 300 yards in a game. The passing game, Deshaun Watson made some slight improvements, but is still sub 60% completion, a 1-to-2 touchdown interception ratio, less than 200 yards in the first two games, each passing wise. And, the defense has been strong as we expected. They've got a lot of pressure on quarterbacks, the opposing quarterbacks, 7 sacks so far. So about 11% of their opponents' passing plays have ended in a sack against a weak offensive line like the Giants and Daniel Jones, who we know takes a lot of sacks. That bodes well for Cleveland's defense. But for me, I just don't know if I trust this Cleveland Browns offense enough to both win and cover this large spread. I mean, the Giants last week, despite the loss to the Commanders, had a decent offensive showing, and Malik Neighbors definitely had a strong game despite dropping that big pass on fourth down. If the Giants had a kicker in that game, Graham Gano went out in the first few plays with an injury. If Graham Gano was available for the Giants, they more than likely would have won that game. They were forced to go for it on 2-point conversions after touchdowns, and they weren't able to kick that go-ahead field goal in the late stages when they were certainly in field goal range. They were forced to go for it on fourth down. So I think that the Giants still have a lot of question marks and still have a lot of things that you would want to be concerned about. But they ran the ball pretty well, and the Browns just gave up 6 yards per carry against Jacksonville. I see the Giants making enough plays to cover in a pretty ugly game. So I'm going to take the points with the New York Giants on the road. Next up, we see the Green Bay Packers taking on the Tennessee Titans. We're going to see the Titans as a 2-point favorite right now, and the total is at 38.5 points. Now, we mentioned because of the injury to Jordan Love and Malik Willis being named the starter, we got a ton of value with Green Bay in that game against Indy last week. The line moved 7 points in the opposite direction. We had to take those points, and Green Bay won that game outright in a game that they were up early and never looked back. In this game, however, I do think it's a much tougher matchup. Now you're on the road with Malik Willis. And when you look at the Titans' defense, yes, the Titans have off to an 0-2 start. It's been ugly, but it hasn't been because of the defense. The defense has been strong both against the run and the pass. They've held both the Jets and the Bears to well under 300 total yards in each of those games. The big reason why the Titans have lost their first two games, and especially that first one where they had a 17-0 lead, has been the big costly mistakes and the turnovers. We saw 2 really bad turnovers in each of the weeks for Will Levis and the Titans' offense. But if they can clean that up, and rely and depend on that defense, I think it's going to be a strong week here for Tennessee. I think they have a great chance of getting their first win of the season. I think especially if you're forcing Malik Willis into tough passing downs, he wasn't really forced into those last week. The Packers ran the ball so well. I think they are. They don't think they're going to run the ball as well in this one. I think the Titans win this game and cover that number. Next up, we see the Chicago Bears taking on the Indianapolis Colts. We see the Colts as a 1.5, 2-point favorite. Total is at 43.5 points. So far, Caleb Williams, the offense hasn't really done much in the first 2 games of the season for Chicago. They've ran for less than 4 yards per carry in each of their first 2 games, well under 100 rushing yards, and the passing game hasn't been much better. And now the big concern was last week, Sunday Night Football, giving up 7 sacks in that game against Houston. The Colts don't have a necessarily, really tough pass rush, but they put up 4 sacks in their first game against the Texans. So I could see, Caleb Williams being under a lot of pressure in this game. And if you don't have a trustworthy run game, even though the Colts have been miserable against the run, I still don't love this Bears offense on the road here. Anthony Richardson, we know he has a ton of talent. The decision-making issues have been there since he was the quarterback at Florida. We've seen the Colts have some ugly turnovers so far this year, but I still think they have a ton of weapons, both on the ground, one of the best running backs in the league in Jonathan Taylor, and in the passing game. And I think the Colts bounce back here, run the ball very well like they have already this season, and I think they win this game at home. So give me the Indianapolis Colts. I'm going to lay less than a field goal. I think it's actually a really good price with Indy. Next up, we see the Houston Texans taking on the Minnesota Vikings. We're going to see the Texans as a 2-point favorite. Total is at 46 points. I'm looking at the under in this game. When you look at the pass rushes for both of these teams, they've been incredible so far. When you look at the Texans, we just talked about the Bears, 7 sacks in that game for Houston, holding Chicago to 205 total yards, 3.2 yards per carry on the ground. It was an excellent defensive showing, even though the Texans fell short of covering the number in that game as a 6.5-point favorite, the closing number. It still was a pretty strong victory, 19-13 in a defensive game. On the other side, the Vikings, that first week they had 5 sacks against the Giants, and that's the New York Giants. We know their offensive line has struggled the last decade. Daniel Jones has been sacked so many times, more than most quarterbacks in the league. But then to do it against the San Francisco 49ers, one of the best offensive lines in football with, Trent Williams on that O-line, having 6 sacks in that game and holding San Fran to under 400 yards. It was a great defensive showing for the Minnesota Vikings in that game. You look at this, both of these offensive lines. Minnesota's was a little bit shaky last week. Same thing with the Texans so far this season. They've given up 7 sacks thus far. Still don't necessarily trust Sam Darnold in that passing game. He's been a very good game manager, but against a tough defense, I think he could struggle. This total's way too high in my opinion. I'm going to go with the under. Next up, the Eagles and the Saints, and we see the Saints as a 2.5-point favorite in the Superdome, but this one could be on the move to 3. It is at 3 right now at circa, and 2.5 with a lot of juice at most other books, so it could be at 3. Obviously, that's a key number, especially in the NFL, so shop those lines. For me, this is a game where I just think we're getting such line value because of recent results. The Saints had 2 blowout wins their first 2 weeks against the Panthers and the Cowboys. The Eagles are just, coming off a game where they blew a lead in the late moments against Kirk Cousins and the Atlanta Falcons in a primetime game, in a game where a lot of people were watching. I still think the Eagles are one of the better teams in the NFC, and I got to give credit to the Saints for their first 2 performances. I mean, they've just been absolutely dominant in all facets of the game. Their run defense has been outstanding. They've ran the ball. Obviously, Kamara's been outstanding as well. Derek Carr's having himself a great start to the year. They're getting a lot of pressure on opposing quarterbacks and 7 sacks so far, but this is still a strong Eagles offensive line. Barkley still having a great start to the season himself. Big mistake at the end of that game, dropping that pass, but he's still been incredible so far with his new team. And I think that the Eagles, I think it's going to be a high-scoring game, and there's a reason why this total is one of the highest of the week at 49.5 points. But I think the Eagles find a way to win it in the end, and we're getting such a great price. If this game was played in Week 1, Philadelphia would definitely be the favorite, and probably by more than a field goal. But because of these first 2 weeks, we see the Saints as a 2.5-point favorite. It's just too much of a move for me. I'm going to go with Philadelphia in this one plus the points. Next up, we see the Los Angeles Chargers taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers. We got the Steelers as a 1-point favorite. Total is at 36 points. Now, obviously, the injury status of Justin Herbert is something to keep track of. It does look like he is expected to play on Sunday, but that could change. And, if it does, the Steelers will definitely be a much bigger favorite. But at this, price and with the current lineups, I like the Steelers laying the 1 point. The Steelers defense has been outstanding so far, and those were 2 road games against the Falcons. Not an easy place to play, and then in Denver in the altitude. 2 not great spots to be in to start the season for any team, but they took care of business, and they weren't the most flashy wins, 18-10 and 13-6, but they were good enough. Justin Fields has been good enough as a starting quarterback. He's about 70% completion percentage, no interceptions thus far. They've taken care of the football. They're +5 right now in the turnover battle. And, the Chargers, they've also had a great start to the season. They're +2 in the turnover battle. They ran the ball very well. J.K. Dobbins has been excellent on the ground. But I do think that the strength of schedule for L.A., facing the Raiders and the Panthers, 2 of the weaker teams, in my opinion, in the league, is something to worry about now going on the road for your second straight road game. I think the Steelers are just too much here defensively. I think, especially with the banged-up Justin Herbert, I don't think the Chargers do enough offensively to keep up in this game. And I think the Steelers have their best offensive showing of the season thus far. I think the passing game opens up a little bit for Justin Fields. And, while the Chargers' pass defense has been strong in terms of yards per play and total yards given up in the passing game, they're giving up 73% completion to opposing quarterbacks. So I think Justin Fields is a solid day. I would play him in fantasy, and I like the Steelers to win this game. Next up, we see the Denver Broncos taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We got the Bucs as a 6.5-point favorite. The total is at 39 points. Now, I think the Bucs are going to be one of the more popular plays on the board for Sunday. They're 2-0 this season. They're coming off a big-time upset win over Detroit. They were an 8-point dog, and they won that game 20-16 outright. The Broncos on the other side, they got a rookie quarterback who's looked shaky. The offense does not look great. They're 0-2. They just put up 6 points. This is a game where a lot of people are going to be on Tampa Bay laying the points. I'm going the other way. I like the Broncos to cover this spread, and I'm going to be taking them on the money line as well. This is a clear letdown spot for Tampa Bay. After that big-time upset win on the road, you return home. I still think the Bucs have a ton of question marks on both sides of the ball, and those were exposed in that game against Detroit. Despite the win, they were outgained 463 to 216 in that ball game. They couldn't run the football. They got sacked 5 times. Baker Mayfield sacked 5 times. Their defense gave up 5.1 yards per carry on the ground. Goff had over 300 passing yards, and not many NFL quarterbacks have had over 300 passing yards this season. It's been a very different type of season for the NFL in terms of the quarterback play. So I think there's a ton of question marks for Tampa Bay going forward. I think Bo Nix has his best game of the season so far. And I think the Broncos, I think this is going to be an upset. I think we see a lot of people lose in their survivor pools with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this week. But give me the Broncos plus the points and on the money line. Next up, we see the Carolina Panthers taking on the Las Vegas Raiders. We're going to see the Raiders as a 5.5 point favorite. Total right now is 40 points. Now, this is a situation with the backup quarterback. Andy Dalton is now the starter after Bryce Young was benched earlier in the week. And I mentioned I love my backup quarterbacks in their first game as a starter, like last week with the Green Bay Packers. However, this game is a little bit different of a scenario because Carolina with Bryce Young was actually set to be around a 7-point dog in this game. But once the Panthers made the decision to bench Bryce Young, the market moved in favor of Carolina. They believe that Andy Dalton's a better option, which I don't necessarily disagree. And now we're actually getting less points than we would have if we had Bryce Young. So a little bit different situation. Like with the Packers last week, we got 7 points of value. The line moved 7 points the other way. This time it's moving 2 points in our direction, which I still like Carolina in this game. It's not because of the quarterback play. It's for me the fact that this is a clear letdown spot for the Raiders after a big win over Baltimore. And I still don't trust the Raiders to be a 5-point favorite against any team in the league. I think Dalton's going to be a better option for Carolina in terms of the passing game. Not by much, but I think the Panthers have a better showing here and cover the number, maybe win the game outright. But I'm going to take the points with the Panthers on the road. Next up, the Miami Dolphins taking on the Seattle Seahawks. We see the Seahawks as a 4.5 point favorite. Total is at 41.5 points. Now, this is a backup quarterback situation where the Dolphins were a 2-point favorite. The injury to Tua Tagovailoa happens, and the blowout loss on Thursday Night Football happens. And now we see the Seahawks as a 4.5 point favorite. A 6.5 point line move through zero. Too much of a move, in my opinion. I'm going to take the points with the Dolphins. I think we're getting great value with Miami. Skylar Thompson did not look great in that Thursday night game when he took over for Tua after the injury, but he was thrown into that game. Now he has a full week, even more than that, because it was a Thursday night game last week, to prepare as a starter. They've still got a ton of weapons, both on the ground with some of the best running backs in the league, and Tyreek Hill, one of the best receivers in the league, Jalen Waddle. This team's got plenty of talent surrounding Skylar Thompson. They should be fine offensively. The defense has also been strong so far. I mean, even in that blowout loss, it was really because of the offense being so ineffective and that big, pick six. That's the reason why it was such a lopsided score. Miami still held Buffalo to 247 total yards and 13 first downs. So I'm going to go with the Dolphins in this one. I like what I'm seeing from Seattle, but they are overvalued in this game. Give me the Dolphins. Next up, the Baltimore Ravens and the Dallas Cowboys. We've got the Ravens as a 1-point favorite. Total is at 47.5 points. This is a tough one. It's basically a coin flip game, and there's no surprise to see a coin flip price in terms of the spread being only 1 point. I'm going to lean towards the Ravens, though. I trust their ground game. They've ran the ball very well, not just this year, but the last few years. And Lamar Jackson is definitely a big part of that. But the Cowboys got crushed on the ground last week against the Saints. They've given up right around 5 yards per carry so far this season, while the Ravens, they've ran for 5.7 yards per carry on the year. And the Ravens defense, I also think, is superior. I mean, they've been excellent against the run. The secondary's had some questionable results, but they've also been able to get some pressure on opposing quarterbacks. That could be an issue for Dak, who's been sacked so far 6 times this season. And, the ground game for Dallas has been non-existent. So it's really been a one-dimensional offense for the Cowboys. I don't love it in a spot like this. So I'm going to go with the Ravens on the money line, or you can lay the 1 point in this one. Next up, we see the San Francisco 49ers taking on the Los Angeles Rams. We've got the Niners as a 7-point favorite. Total is at 44.5 points. So the Niners are the second biggest favorite on the board this week, and I do think they bounced back from a rough showing last week in Minnesota, but not by enough for me to want to lay 7 points with them on the road in this game. I think the Niners will definitely have a lot of fans in the building in LA for this one, but I mean, when you look at this when you look at the Rams, I mean, obviously dealing with some injuries in the receiving game, especially their top two receivers in Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are out for what looks like extended period of time. But on the other side, I mean, Brock Purdy, two of his biggest security blankets, and Christian McCaffrey and Deebo Samuel are also out in this one. McCaffrey hasn't played yet, and obviously we know what he can do on the ground, but he also had 70 receptions last year, a lot of checkdowns from Brock Purdy, and Deebo Samuel was the most targeted, receiver so far for Purdy this year, 19 targets in those first 2 weeks, and he also ran the ball 10 times this year. Those are two big losses for Brock Purdy, who I'm still not necessarily sold on as a starting quarterback in the NFL. Add to the fact that this Niners offensive line, which is considered one of the best in the league, has actually not held up very well this season, giving up 6 sacks last week and 9 of them so far in the year. Purdy has been sacked just under 14% of his passing plays. That's a concern for me. I think the Niners still have a great team, but they gave up 6.1 yards per carry last week. Their offense has been shaky, and I got to go with the Los Angeles Rams plus the points in this one. Next up, we see the Detroit Lions taking on the Arizona Cardinals. The Cardinals are a 2.5-point home dog, and the total is the steepest of the week at 51.5 points for good reason. I mean, the Cardinals, they put up 41 points last week. They gave up 34 in week 1. They are looking like a pretty volatile team. I think they have one of the weaker defenses in the NFL, but that offense looks revamped, and with Marvin Harrison having a huge week last week, I think the Cardinals will continue to have some strong performances offensively. On the other side, Detroit Lions are known to have one of the best offensive lines, running games, and some of the best receivers in the league. Jared Goff was not his best last week against Tampa Bay, but they still put up 463 total yards of offense, so I wouldn't be surprised to see this game go over, but I also like the Lions. I do think that defensively they are the much better team. They should be able to get some pressure on Murray with Aiden Hutchinson after an unbelievable week for him last week against Baker Mayfield and the Bucs. So I think we see a bounce-back performance from Detroit. I think they win this game and cover the spread. Next up, the Sunday Night Football contest on NBC between the Chiefs and the Falcons. We see the Chiefs as a 3.5-point favorite. Total is at 46.5 points. Now, you could say this is a letdown spot for the Falcons after their big-time comeback and upset victory on the road in a primetime game last week, but I think the same thing could be said for a letdown for KC as they were down late against their big-time rivals. I mean, that rivalry has been brewing in the last few years between Burrow and Mahomes, and a really, costly penalty for Cincinnati at the end of that one gives KC the chance to kick the game-winning field goal as time expired. But for me, I just like the Falcons. I like the way that offense really improved as the game went along against Philadelphia. Kirk Cousins found his game, and we know Bijan Robinson's one of the best running backs in the league. They ran the ball very, very well in that one, over 5 yards per carry against Philadelphia. I think the Falcons moved the ball, well against KC. I mean, this Chiefs defense, last week it was better against the run, but it gave up 6 yards per carry almost against the Ravens in week 1. Burrow was a lot better last week than he was against the Patriots in week 1. And I just think that when you look at the Chiefs offense, we know Mahomes, one of the best quarterbacks already of all time. Even his resume right now puts him in that conversation. But so far, only 137 passing yards last week. The offensive line hasn't held up too well. The injuries are starting to pile up. Isaiah Pacheco is going to be out for a long time. I got to roll the Falcons in this one, plus the points in primetime. Next up, the first of 2 Monday night games for Week 3 is the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Buffalo Bills. The Bills are the home favorite of 5.5 points, and the total is at 45.5 as well. The Jaguars have had a rough start to the year, 0-2 this season. Losses at Miami and home against the Browns. They were a favorite against Cleveland, and they had a lead against Miami, a pretty nice lead at the end of that game. So definitely some really heartbreaking losses for Jacksonville to start the year. But I think this is a game where they at least compete and cover the number. I'm not sure if they win the game outright, but I honestly like what I'm seeing from this Jacksonville offense. The passing game hasn't been as strong, but they've ran the ball very, very well. And against this Buffalo Bills run defense, against the Cardinals in week 1, James Conner had a huge game on the ground. And even against the Dolphins, Achane had a nice week. The Dolphins really weren't able to run the football much because they were down big early. But I think the Jaguars are going to be able to move the ball, move the chains on the ground in this game. Their defense holds up enough to at least cover the spread. I think Buffalo could win it, but I'm going to take the points with the Jags on the road. Next up, we see the Cincinnati Bengals and the Washington Commanders, the final game for the Week 3 card in the NFL. The Bengals are your biggest favorite of the week at 7.5 points, and the total is at 47. Now, we talked about the Jaguars having some tough losses so far. The Bengals have really gone through it so far this season. They were an 8-point favorite around there in week 1 against the Patriots. They lose that game outright. And then last week, we just talked about it, the Chiefs, they were pretty fortunate to win that game, and the Bengals were up late. Costly penalty gives the Chiefs that field goal opportunity to win it in the, as time expired. It's an 0-2 start for Cincinnati, but they're still a big favorite here, and I think for good reason. I like the Bengals to bounce back, win this game, and cover the spread. I think this Commanders defense could be the worst in the league right now, and the Giants were even able to get over 300 yards of offense, run the ball for 6 yards per carry, and only had the Commanders only had 1 sack in that game. We talked about if the Giants had a kicker in that one, they more than likely would have won that game. So I'm not really impressed with this Commanders defense. The offense has been fine. Daniels is a nice quarterback. I think he's been one of the better rookie quarterbacks so far this season, but I don't think it's going to be enough in Cincinnati in a tough environment, in a primetime game. I think the Bengals offense has its best showing so far this year by far, maybe 30-plus points, and they win this game and cover the spread. So give me Cincinnati in this one. And that's it. Those are the games for Week 3 in the National Football League. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe, and put those football picks in the comments section below. Again, if you're looking for my best bets, you can find those at Pick Dawgz Premium. As always, this is Ron Romanelli. Good luck.